I hope that was ASMR-y. I did it thinking it would be ASMR-y, but I'm looking at Audacity and it's just fucking gone all over the place. Yeah. I had to delay this video because I couldn't get my mic to fit into the mic stand. Like, I was just like, well, that's not working. Guess I can't voice it, and that was it. But we're here now. And the world is worse off because of it. How do you do intros, man? Did you guys see the FNAF film? It was bad. Who would have thought? I'm not gonna get all mad at it, since I have better things to do. Don't look at the video length. But the Five Nights at Freddy's film is bad. It is just bad. In a way that's not even very interesting, but I in turn find interesting because of what it is. The FNAF film. For most of my life, I've been hearing snippets of, ooh, they're gonna make a Minecraft movie. Ooh, there's gonna be a meme movie. Don't say I said anything, but keep your eye on Get Fat and Roll Downhill on Roblox. They're gonna make something with it, and I don't know what, but internet media is one of the newer, big, popular things, but you don't generally get a ton of films or just general stuff about it, unless it's marketable enough as it is, or it basically came out by accident. This is for many reasons. A lot of it's just not easily adapted into a film, or what I find more interesting, that the internet is really weird and kind of a mess. Like PewDiePie and Smosh and stuff. That's all for kids, right? But it's not appropriate for kids in any way. I still kinda think that guy's name is Anthony Padildo when I see him, and I saw the video that made that joke when I was like 8. That's corruption of the youth. Same with Five Nights at Freddy's. Childish, confusing plots, really actively bright monsters, but it's also violent and grim. I know adults that like Five Nights at Freddy's, but it's primarily a kids thing, and a profitable kids thing at that. That could be made into a film. So the mainstream money men see this money mass and they have to use it. It is money after all, but don't want to deal with the unfiltered nature of that internet media. They want the kids in seats, but they won't be in seats because of age restrictions the internet doesn't have. So it's just fucking nothing? It's more the context I find interesting, because the actual film is just the fan service they could include next to a bad horror film. Not a kids horror film, a normal horror film that has to tone itself down because there's a child in the room. I've said it's bad a couple of times, but this isn't a review of the Five Nights at Freddy's film, so my opinion of it will be left ambiguous here. Maybe I like it, who knows. But that tonelessness made me think of Madness Combat, an animated web series I watched when I was younger that is just violence. I shouldn't have been watching these when I was a child, but I have grown up perfectly normal, and the videos you've seen should provide documentation of that. It's essentially an edgy 22-year-old, I calculated, take on already edgy action media like the Resident Evil films or whatever. It starts as what I think is Crinkles, the creator, just wanting to make a cartoon where people fight. But from there, more and more stuff was added, and I think the criteria was just, is it cool? Like any good action film franchise, Resident Evil, it gets good on the 5th entry when the edgy video game tone is fully formed. There's big enemies with big guns that shoot big bullets. There's a segment in the 7.5th one where they do a co-op puzzle. Characters get this like prototype ass arm. In general, the designs are just made out of them finding random clothes and being shot. There isn't really a plot at all. We sit in high as shit at 2 AM watching Madness Combat videos. I like Madness, I think it's cool, they did baggy trousers, but it's kind of a mess. It would never get an adaptation of FNAF's scale, and yet has got plenty of adaptations from small scale to fully viable. Most of them video games because of the obvious influences, and I wanted to look at those and how you carry this mad, haha, tone. I'll start with this because it's the first Madness game that was made, and I think one of the better known ones. Crinkles did the art, so it looks all accurate. It's got a lot of content for a 2003 Flash game. It's really bad. You'll probably first make a character in this funky character section, and then you'll go into a tutorial where it teaches you how to play. I've written edit this several times in brackets after that, but I can't think what that would mean. The game does try to replicate the animation style in its controls. You move with WASD and control your hand with the mouse. I say control your hand because it's not inherently pointing. You also swing the mouse to attack with a melee weapon, put your hands next to weapons to pick them up, and press F when your hand has momentum to throw. In theory, this all sounds okay, and I did manage to feel kind of in control when I was in an empty room and able to spawn stuff at my leisure. This should signal the problem. I'm not going to go apeshit and start tearing the game apart unless I start getting the visions again. It is a 2003 Flash game, remember, but this control method is way too ambitious for that and doesn't really gel with other aspects of the game. I tried getting it, but the thing is, I don't think this tracks the location of your mouse on screen like you'd think it does. As in, like, so other games would give you a cursor and the character would point to that cursor. But as I said, you're not pointing, you're doing a bunch of stuff. So rather, it's tracking the movements of your mouse. The best way I can explain this is to think of an analog stick. In this game, Bleed, when I point the right analog stick left, Rin shoots left. This would be the same for Madness, but it's mouse only. It feels bad, because with an analog stick, when you reach the boundary, you reach the boundary. You can't push the stick any further. My mouse can go anywhere though, and it will probably go off screen. There's nothing showing where your mouse is, so you will lose control, which is kind of madness, but fuck off. I tried multiple ways of playing the game, full screen, in browser, like whatever, and they all had different issues. In browser, the screen was so small I constantly went off it, and in full screen I couldn't tell when my mouse went off screen, so nah. It asks you to do a lot too. The game's levels basically consist of an empty room where enemies are spawned. There's never any cover, and you don't have any real way to defend yourself aside from attacking, so how the game goes is, I'd spawn in, maybe get past a few melee enemies, and then the enemies with guns come in and I'm just killed because my gun has run out of ammo, and to get a new one I have to throw this one away and then pick up another while being shot with bullets to knock me back, while using these incredibly fiddly controls. Don't comment, "Oh, I played this so much when I was younger," because you didn't. I remember, like 12 years I've been going through this process of playing this game for 2 seconds, dying, and then just spawning weapons in an empty room. I know you. Or you played it with cheats. Yeah, I checked arcade pre-hacks first because I might not have a uni degree, but I know what I'm doing when it comes to cheating in Flash games. The site is still up and perfectly usable, but Madness Interactive has unlockable cheat codes built in, which is fun, so I cheated in the cheat codes to see if there's anything after these screens. I had this with a few games, especially stuff like this that just wasn't very playable, where if I didn't get very far I'd assume the game just goes insane after the bit I played and becomes something completely different and way better. This might be true for Charlotte's Web, I still need to check. But it isn't for Madness Interactive. You just go through enemies who get better and better equipment before shooting the sheriff. You get to choose an upgrade between stages, like a roguelike or something. Didn't really help. And you do get a jetpack, so the foundations for a good game are here. There's also the experiment mode, which is the spawning weapons and enemies in an empty room I've mentioned, and some challenges which are surprisingly a mixed bag. Zombies and Matrix are just kind of spawning enemies again, but lasers kind of works as you're just dodging lasers while trying to shoot their source in time. Knifing around sort of works too, as in you can get a knack for it and hit this guy pretty consistently, but it kind of highlights just how odd this control scheme is. Like, why is this here? The game isn't without its merits. Again, it looks good. The style with the gameplay perspective makes this the closest looking to a Madness cartoon at a standstill, and it comes from a time when these videos were much colder. This matrixy, cool vibe, along with a limited, muted colour palettes compared to the more edgy, "oh, I'm going insane" tone of later videos. So it's nice to see that style in both audio and visuals be put into a game like this that's really trying to make playable Madness and feels pretty fancy on the surface. I understand why this was popular, again, 2003 Flash game, and look at all this. It feels fully featured with all these modes and weapons, and the control scheme isn't even unworkable, it's just in this context with this control method it ruins everything else. There is more here though. There's a reloaded version coming this year possibly, made by the people who made People Playground, which like fits, but what? It looks cool, like what this wanted to be with a style closer to the more recent videos, and they're updating this blog weekly, so best of luck to them. This isn't the first time this has been remade though, weirdly. It's not meant to be madness, as you'll hear, but there's Stevetrix, which I like because the offer comments are, "No, it's like madness, but I only learned actual script like a month ago, and I am nowhere near finished with this game." He never updated it, but what's here works better than the initial game since it has a cursor. You can backflip and slide too, it's sick as hell. The main one I wanted to mention though was Madness Rekindled, because this sort of works with more exaggerated physics that feel easier to read and a control scheme that just makes more sense. It's not finished, but what's here feels good. They've added colour to that Madness style, and the creator's account still has all the old versions, so you can kinda see them learning programming as you play these. Cool shit. I'll probably never understand how you're meant to play Madness Interactive, but it at least inspired people to make their own games, so I guess I'd look a bit rubbish if my conclusion on it is that the controls are bad. They are bad though. If you watched my last video, I talked about a few weird little RPGs I'd made, two of which were basically adaptations of Doom into a turn-based RPG. Guess what we're doing again? Madness Retaliation is a turn-based Metroidvania RPG that I got completely sucked into for a few hours. Like, I bought a game, thought, oh, I'll play this Flash game for a bit while that installs, and then I wrote this entire review thing without opening the game I bought. You get a little squad of guys and go into a big building to complete the mission. I didn't actually remember the plot when I wrote that, but that's essentially it, so... God, this chair fucking... God, the arms creak on this fucking thing. You're going into a cloning facility to collect vials that say DNA on them. It's not focused at all, as you'd expect, but like Doom RPG, there is personality, as if this is a scenario written by a dungeon master or something. Tutorials are written in character as Hank, which basically means Revolver Roach, the developer. You consistently know this as a little Flash game for its tone, with plenty of jokes dotted about. I like these recruitment posters for the enemies. Rooms are plastered with posters saying, "Enlist in the 1337 crew," but when you stop fighting a elite crew and move on to stronger enemies, you get posters saying to join the ATP, because 1337 isn't good enough. There's a lot of reference stuff too that's kind of dumb, but this isn't Free Guy or something, you know, it's an old Flash game. I have no idea when the last time I saw a "the cake is a lie" reference was. At this point it's just kind of nostalgic and helps the game keep feeling human behind all the edge. I am just talking about background details though with all this. The game is really about making your weak squad a strong squad and exploring this big facility. It's held together by a combat system that is honestly kind of cool and probably taken from somewhere, but I don't know what. One of those Mega Man RPGs probably. If that's right, then we in there, boys. Your squad is placed on a grid with enemies and you use AP to move and attack. So the idea is that you want to use as few of your points for moving as possible so that you can use them for attacking, but each weapon has a limited range, so you'll need to be close enough to attack at all. Enemies also attack whoever's closest to them, so it creates this push and pull dynamic where you want to push your more tanky characters forwards without letting the enemy just dump them exclusively with bullets. It works for attacking as well, as you want to use a character's range to its fullest by taking out further away enemies, but you want to focus on enemies that are near enough to attack you or are generally stronger. This equipment is also your entire character. You don't level up from fights or anything, you just find equipment that is placed around the map, which leads to it being very flexible. It's one of those RPGs where half the battle is just the inventory screen and figuring out how you want each character to play, but they can play fairly differently as lots of equipment have unique attributes rather than just direct stat changes, and each character has a smaller AP cost for certain weapon types. You want to build cool guys, but you want to build them around what they work with. Like, I had one guy that would hook enemies in before shooting them with a low range but low AP costing pistol, and another had lower health but a weapon with high range and damage, so he'd work as a sniper. A sniper, or machine gun, that could shoot through multiple enemies but included other squad mates in that. This led to a fun little decision where I actually killed a squad mate because he was stunned and couldn't move, but there was just like a perfect lineup of enemies. I had to do it, I had no choice. I wouldn't say it feels particularly Madness combat-ish in the moment-to-moment look at it, but the importance of movement does actively put you into the situation. You don't feel disconnected from the fighting. The context of everything also kind of backs it up, with the short length giving it a pace that makes your increase in power really noticeable, and once you're using that power in specific ways for characters, you're doing cool stuff. I had a guy who would kill an enemy with his sword and then get AP from that just to do it again. I felt like Sephiroth, it was great. That pacing I mentioned is worth emphasising too, because it makes exploration really click. They contextualise this combat pretty well and know exactly when to do it, with specific parts for backtracking that emphasise how much your characters have improved and just addressing annoying things. I thought exploration would get frustrating with you having to replay these fights that you don't get anything from, but then it gave me an item to just turn them off. I felt like my SMG character was getting kind of useless, and then it gave me an item that made SMG stun enemies while using encounters where the best option was to stun enemies. Like, it feels really well designed and thought out for something kind of meatheady in nature. I also liked exploration just for exploring. I mentioned that it's a flash game, and that makes it kind of cool and surreal to go through. Weird secrets like space are everywhere and pull apart this grounded facility, which is kind of like Madness with the hellscape existing around the minimalist buildings. Obviously exploring this gets you good equipment for combat, but it all looks different, and I wanted to build up these weird, cool, edgy OCs. One of the characters just looks like Riddick, almost by default, and as you progress you accidentally end up with some school jotter-ass designs. I had the Grim Reaper with sunglasses and a revolver at one point, and this was directly the Grim Reaper. The description for the cloak was, "The Reaper left his cloak out, I took it. It was easy." Peter Griffin did that one time, but the combat being fun and the edgy style of it all really hooked me into this. I miss my squad of Deathbringer 101, the Sexecutioner, LOL Waffles XD, and Madness Fan 1992. It's not a masterpiece, it's just this combat basically, which is kind of clunk itself. You can probably tell this view kind of obscures a lot of the grid, and means it might take a second for the game to work out what you actually want to do. Also, the one time it goes full on puzzle focused is just kind of obtuse. Maybe I'm dumb, but I've never been very good with these like, well this wall says Jobby on it, and if you change the letters to the number they'd be in the alphabet, then that's the code, dumbass. You should have figured this out while you were being shot. Anyway, yeah, really good for what it is though. This is a flash game, remember. More companies should put basic turn-based RPGs on weak systems, because apparently it makes me freak the fuck out. There's a Retaliation 2 that's been in development for a while as well. It hasn't had an update in 9 months, but it is an indie project. That doesn't necessarily mean it's dead. Life just gets in the way sometimes, you know. We're all humans watching this, correct, my fellow humans? I love the sun. Okay, this technically isn't a Madness game, but I thought it'd be fun to take a break and stop throwing things at me. Newgrounds Rumble is a Smash Bros-ish fighting game based around Newgrounds. It's dumb and mashy, but I kind of like it, and Hank's here, so he doesn't seem very good. My main was Salad Fingers, I liked him. According to nerds, Hank's moveset here is similar to gun characters in Brawlhalla, as he has a gun, but it doesn't quite function as a gun. More as a melee weapon, but not really, because it is a gun. I don't know fighting games very well. They're cool, but when people talk about getting into them, it's the same tone as when you start learning an instrument, and I'm just awful at approaching games like that. So, as someone who can't confidently do this, I never got how you play as Hank. I got the other characters fine because it is all inherently mashy, but I just never did very well with Hank. His stats are consecutive parries equal bonus something, and bi-directional crouch attacks, with cons of parries don't stun and overall slow. Do with that information what you will. Still finished his little storyline though, which just involves him killing kids, killing P-Bot, who's protecting the gate to his realm, and then the last stage is just a ton of Hanks. Just like the cartoons. I ended up playing this for like 2 hours, by the way. I just feel like I should mention that since I didn't need to play it for that long. It's cute, it's not a good fighting game, but I don't really care. I just like it for how Newgroundsy it is. The tips are off for comments and it's just all so edgy. Fancy Pants had to leave, it was just too much for him. This has the same artist as Newgrounds Rumble with Tom Philp doing the programming, and goddamn, this looks fairly different to general Madness stuff with this more scratchy comic book style. That has a flash smoothness to everything, but this feels much more direct and physical with visible brush strokes and much more expressive characters overall. They have a gamey bounce to them and much more, like, flicky designs. They don't feel as rigid, as characters have a slight slouch and overall feel more compressed. It's good. The scribbly rage of it all fits really nicely, and the music's got those breakcore beats that you love, which further adds to the chaos. Good. And that's probably the most interesting part of it, as the actual game's just shooting. It's a simple run and gun game and it's only like 5 minutes long. There's no weapons other than the default machine gun. Enemies are just there to be gunned down and you can die, but there's a good chance you won't, and even then there's checkpoints in this 5-minute long game. I don't think that's the point though. It feels like this just wants you to go through it, see the cool style, and then move on, which is fair enough, and that style is pretty cool. Thanks Mike for the CPU saving frame buffer wizardry. Regent does feel like a bit of a base though that would be a shame to throw away, and so they did the same thing again with Madness Accelerant. Also a run and gun shooter, but just slightly adjusted in ways that I think make it work much better. It's a shot-for-shot playable remake of Madness 7, which is kind of cute as just a thing. I don't think any of the other games I played are as direct as that, but it's also one where Hank is being chased by this giant Tricky the Clown throughout it, which actually works really well for this game's pace. With the last one, it's so short that it feels kind of like half level, half boss fight. But here, the whole thing is a boss fight that's constantly starting and stopping. The chase dynamic adds a push to its pacing, which I think helps a ton, but also there's multiple weapons that work differently, all with limited ammo and you only being able to hold one at a time. This, along with the coming and going boss fight, means that you're always switching what you're doing. This has the same depth as Regent, but it's disguised, so it feels like more's going on, and it works. It's even got mouse support, so this takes what felt like a nice proof of concept in Regent and flips that into a 10-minute burst of mad arcadey action. There's also a third one. While I like Accelerant, I don't know what more you could do with it, you know? It's cool for what it is, but I don't think expanding on it would really benefit it, as it's so simple at its core. The depth of it seems to agree though, as Hydraulic uses the same assets and movement and stuff, but for a small horde mode. I get the thought process. Lots of action games include something like this because I assume it's easy enough to develop, and if the combat works then surely the game mode should work. There's a game coming up that directly benefits from having a horde mode, but here, nah. See, as I've said, Accelerant and Regent are very basic. In Regent especially, the combat just feels like a means to an end. It's everything around it that works, so when you isolate it, I just find it dull. You pick up weapons, spam the weapon at enemies, and repeat. It doesn't feel particularly cool, and I started noticing annoying things like the knockback and the camera being really zoomed in. It got to a point where there were enough enemies that actually engaging with the combat seemed to just get me juggled, so it was easier to just stand and shoot. Part of me was enjoying upgrading stuff. It's basic, but you can buy some turrets and upgrade your guy, and just sets off that part of my brain. I like how it gets progressively laggier and the sound starts cutting out as you progress. It's eventually too much for it to handle, which is fun, and I think that's what people play Vampire Survivors for. You're just walking about until your computer gets really hot, and then you're like, yes, the RNG. I wish there were more level gimmicks. There's one that rotates the screen like a boat, and that's about it. but that does put this Flash game on par with PS4 launch titles. I don't know, Hydraulic isn't bad or anything, it's just cramming this combat system somewhere I don't think it suits. It was made for Madness Day, an annual celebration of madness on Newgrounds, and so I assume rushed, but the other two were as well. I just think they had a better plan from the outset. This sounds good on paper and probably couldn't be adjusted much past that. You know, you got 2 days, you can't really just be like, I don't know, I think we should bin it all, you know, you gotta get something out. What I've shown you so far could be considered video games, but a lot of these Flash games being made were in fact not games. That's not fair. As we've seen, making full, enjoyable, playable video games is fairly difficult, especially if you're just a teenager fucking about with Flash, so a lot of stuff just tried to be wee interactive toys. Punk-O-Matic, Jive Machine, Interactive Buddy, Ultimate Peter Griffin soundboard, I like that one. It's got a funny section including Lesbian, Disease, and Superman 2. Good for calling a 12-year-old child a gay on COD, because it's not you doing it, it's Peter Griffin. Anyway, these Madness fan games were already a space for amateur programmers to experiment, so of course there were plenty of these, as Newgrounds call them, gadgets. One of the earliest being Mad Dress Up from 2003, giving us hope with the offer comments of, I can't make games, bleh. It's very early 2000s Newgrounds. I made an edgelord cat, I beat him up, and then this has a scene creator which doesn't use the character you make, but whatever, that's fine. I made a death chain. When I went back to the character creator thing, my cat guy was gone, and I felt more upset than I expected. Maybe I'm pregnant, but I do wish this cared more about the dress up guy. I'm sure you're all at the edge of your seat waiting for my rating on Mad Dress Up, but you'll have to wait as we move on to Madness Deathwish, which is one of those games like Whack Your Boss where you just sort of click a thing and then see violence. For what it is, it's fine. It's a little stiffer than the normal animations I think, but more jokey and cartoonish in the ways you'd hope for something like this. Blood is good. Recent studies confirm that blood is good thing. Has some dated references too. Remember Jack Thompson? He said video games were too violent, so everyone proved him wrong by sending death threats. There's Easter eggs as well, some of which you can't just spam tab for, along with unlockable blooper style animations. For what it is, it's alright. It's just watching a guy get killed, but that's what Madness basically is, so you had 5 stars. There's more of these Whack Your Boss type Madness games though, including 2 called Death Chamber. I like Death Chamber 1 especially, because it feels like there's multiple OCs I don't know as the death options, and the aggressive red impact text saying, "Wait, it's a death chamber," made my eyes feel kind of fuzzy when in full screen. You know those videos where it's like stare into the centre and don't blink and it probably damages your eyes a bit? It was the same feeling as that, but like Madness themed. Heavy Metal X made a Madness music creator and DJ Madness 2 as well, kind of. It's 2 songs they like and that one they use in a bunch of the videos, and you press buttons to make sounds. You maybe could make music with it if you're creative. Other stuff like Madness customization is filled with different ways to style your man, all of them dedicated to just being way too much, but that's kind of great. The guy who sprinted to lunch in high school probably loved it. Madness Scene Creator 3 is cool too. It opened someone's imagination to creating this huge, overly complicated fanfiction. It does limit the amount of swords I can give a guy though, and the creator is still in the comments after 16 years telling people you can rotate weapons. He's been doing this for years. There's also a Madness Scene Creator 5, and that was updated as late as 2022. Good stuff. I'm gonna move on from these now though, because I think you get it. I'm not rating Mad Dress Up yet though, you'll just have to wait for that.
Oh my god! Oh gosh! I think it'll make a person become insane.
This game is an atrocity.
It's revolting. It's violent. It's everything you love in a game. And your mom's gonna hate it.
Deathwish got a sequel as well that's not just animations, instead a survival shooter thing. I'm mentioning it because it's the most Flash game I've played. You shoot enemies to buy guns and armour and unlock abilities, while getting those whack your boss style animations for killing a certain amount of enemies. There's zombies and jetpack guys, and the shooting actually feels pretty good. You have to directly aim at enemies, not just past them, and the weapons all have specific ranges and rate of fires and stuff. Basic, but it feels focused on and well presented enough. These upgrades end up making you extremely overpowered as well, because of course they do. You get one where you can just teleport about, and it's great. But yeah, a really basic, typical Flash game. I feel like I should include it in the Flash game video. Same with Madness Revelation. I thought I'd search Madness Revelation just because that's such a typical subtitle, and did get this by Madness Rules 101, which starts with a whole assortment of impressions. It puts an epilepsy warning in blank text on a grey background, and then much brighter text saying, "There's your damn warning, don't go apeshit on me." You play it and it just says "Madness for the win" with flashing lights. I thought this was it and the wait for the end thing was a prank, but nah, it's just really slow. A guy eventually comes in and commits a hate crime, and then it ends. So no, it wasn't just the flashing lights, but I mean, the tags are epic and win, and the comments are actually unreadable. It's so cool. I went on this guy's account and it's just some weird spam account where they popped up, called people the F-slur, and then ended the account with a post saying, "This is fucking bullshit" about not being allowed to just call people slurs. I don't totally know why I highlighted this, but I kind of do. I just like how dumb it is. This weird child's gibberish is rated by people who are actually talking like that. Like when you make fun of this lol Rafflecopter XD shit, it sounds like you're being extreme, but no. People did type like that. It's a similar reason to why I'm bringing up Super Soaker Madness right now. It's Super Soaker Madness because it was also a class project, so guns wouldn't be allowed. I also noticed the help is really long, but that's my mistake I guess, because in the description the guy agrees. The actual game's just shooting enemies off a cliff with a water gun, but there's different enemy types and the water gun has a slight drop off, so it's better than the vast majority of computer class projects. I hope Kenny Sheep passed like they deserved, especially when seeing that their other game is Chuck Norris vs Hell, a shitpost from 2007. I really like the character selections in this though. It turns out it's totally random, but I thought this guy's idea of evil people in hell were Master Chief, the guy from Super Size Me, and my personal friend, Commander Keen. I'm sorry about the constant owls. I didn't realise how annoying they would be cause the school computers don't have any speakers. You should add Rei Ayanami from the show Neon Genesis Evangelion. I know a few people that want to punch her in the kidney, man, what the fuck?
I'm interrupting the video to tell you about my favourite Flash game. I mean, is it one of these bajillion endless runners? It is not. It is not. I have a more adept palette. What my favourite Flash game was when I was a kid has got to be Deja Vu. Now, what the fuck is Deja Vu? You're saying? It is a canine story from the popular television fiction show Star Trek. Deja Vu follows K9 throughout the stories in which we did not even realise he was there. He gets introduced in School Reunion, hanging around with Sarah Jane Smith, but was that his first appearance in the show? The new show? It was not. He was also present during the events of Rose, End of the World, World War III, The Empty Child somehow, and New Earth. Deja Vu was a BBC-made Flash game released for their own website, of course. Gotta use that taxpayer money somehow. And it was fucking sick. Essentially, you go around playing through the background levels of these levels, right? Did you ever think, oh, that moment where the Ninth Doctor... Did you ever think, did the Ninth Doctor? Probably not. Did you ever think, the Ninth Doctor, you know, he rips off that plastic version of Mickey's head. What's that about? Oh, and then we just never see that Mickey again. The Ninth Doctor's like, no, he's melting. But you know what really happened? That's right. K9 blasted the shit out of him. K9 blasted him. He's fucking dead. He's dead. That's level 1. You kill him in level 1. That's what I'm saying. My favorite level's gotta be the Empty Child, just because of how much of a random choice this is. They're not going in order, are they? I mean, they are going in chronological order, I suppose, but not like year-wise. I mean, I don't really know how K9's getting about. When the fuck was he time traveling or whatever? But in The Empty Child, right, the threat really isn't there, is it? Like, the whole point of the story is that these people are just ill, and, like, it's like technology is, like, killing them or whatever. Well, you know, the doctor says this.
Everybody lives, Rose. Just this once. Everybody lives.
Little did he know. K9 round the back, fucking putting a Glocky in their face, you know what I mean? Anyway, the objective of the game, well, whatever. You don't care about the objective of this game. Turns out there's not a bad speedrunning community for it, which is weird. But yeah, it looks like you can actually get pretty good at this. The speedrun that I found here did it in like 1:20. One of the levels. So that's pretty sick. Good for them. Good for them. You also fight the Slovene. There's just a lot of killing. There's a lot of killing. My favorite thing about Doctor Who is about how pacifistic the TV show is. And then all the games are like, yeah, just kill him. Just kill him. Anyway, back to your regularly scheduled programming.
If you're wondering what that had to do with the video, then here's an image I found online, and when I googled Madness Combat Doctor Who, Google came up with an AI saying Tricky, also known as Dr. Hoffner or Clown, is a main antagonist in the Madness Combat universe and is considered one of the most well-known characters. Sniff. Sorry, I don't even have a cold. I just sneezed multiple times before recording this. I feel like dying now. I think this is the best known of these games, with it being worked on by several fancy Newgrounds at Madness people, being pretty straightforward in capturing that series style and not being kind of unplayable, at least gameplay wise. This is Madness! As a beat 'em up with an emphasis on weapons. Guns have low ammo and weapons have durability though, so you're switching between them a lot, and as you'd expect, that 2D style is captured perfectly. There's a campaign along with a full arena mode with upgrades, stuff to customise your character with, and companions to unlock. It even pushes Flash way past its capabilities. Like way past its capabilities. This thing is laggy as shit. It might be the emulator. As you may know, Flash got shut down a few years back, so all these sites have moved to using Flash emulators, which is fine. It's obviously not perfect, but this is the only game where I feel the need to bring it up, because after only a few enemies show up, the frame rate tanks, which could be cool in a the system's breaking down kind of way, but it ends up basically being constant and made later levels unplayable for me. I ended up having to just ignore cool techniques the game wanted me to use because I wasn't sure what inputs were actually being picked up. There's also a slow motion, but it also makes the game feel laggy. It doesn't feel like a cool bullet time, it's a slow motion, but it's the only one of these cool techniques I could get to consistently work, and it's headache inducing. I found the game would switch between not having enough enemies to be interesting and just lagging, not really hitting a good sweet spot. Project Nexus is cool, there's a proper little Madness game here, it's just, if only it wasn't confined to Flash. Project Nexus 2, or just also Madness Project Nexus, is a full proper Madness game that you can buy on Steam. A couple years after the Flash game did well, they kickstarted and Steam greenlit this 3D sequel, and 7 years after that it was released. The reason I went into so little detail on the original Project Nexus is that this does a lot of the same stuff, but in a context that can handle more than 3 enemies. It's also a beat 'em up with a campaign and arena modes, but 3D. That 3D does take away from the feeling of this being a playable Madness video as you'd expect. I think it's just the simplicity of it. The 2D's got a readability that makes this more satisfying to watch. You look at what's actually moving on one of the 2D characters and compare that to the 3D. There's just more going on here, which allows for more freedom in what they do artistically, but doesn't feel as cohesive. It also looks less natural, weirdly. When characters make robotic actions, it's much less noticeable in 2D because you can get away with speeding over things like turning, whereas here you need to watch the character slowly rotate. With that said, it does allow them to do more. I don't think this was a bad decision, as levels do jump about a lot, and I don't think they would have worked the same in 2D. That style is fairly flat, and while you could probably represent a lot of locations through context, I don't know how different they'd feel. Here though, the 3D allows for different camera perspectives and texturing that's pretty varied, albeit consistently grungy. They're also able to have more of a spectrum when it comes to lighting. The cartoons do use lighting of course, but a lot of them are, again, flat. Shadows would just complicate things, so they stick to grey rooms with bloody highlights, which is often the same here, but there is lighting. I'm tempted to explain why lighting is good, but you're not thick, I'm not doing that. I like the 3D itself too. As I said, it's pretty grungy and has this weird haze to everything. It feels rough in a way that I actually think suits the tone a bit better. I find the minimalism of the 2D doesn't bring across the edginess as much as this. That feels kind of cold and emotionless, whereas this feels a lot angrier, with the darker lighting making everyone feel a lot more threatening, and I don't think this could be done without losing at least a little readability. Most character designs translate well enough too. The 2D is simple, but it's more the amount of assets and the detail and texture that's simple. The actual characters are crammed full of little details. There's the thing I mentioned the cartoons do where each of the main characters are kind of standard at first and gain their designs as they're injured or find new clothes or whatever. It leads to this messiness that I think works for Madness as they're just this cohesion of different battles, and I think that messiness goes alongside the grungy tone pretty nicely. They still look very dorky, but I love them for that. Anyway, probably another big reason this is 3D is the combat kind of lends itself best to it. On the surface, it's a pretty simple brawler, punch through or cut through or shoot through a bunch of angry men. The different means of combat help it feel varied and scrappy. Unloading a gun, then dropping it to pummel them is fun, but it's selling it a little short. This works as a standard brawler, but there's a ton of easily accessible flexibility. It only uses a handful of keys, but in combination can be used to do a really fast array of moves. You can drop the gun, or you could throw it, and that could lead into punching, or you start attacking them with a melee weapon in your other hand. You can punch, or you can spin, or you could just shove them. There's a lot of subtle, understandable differences in how you play, and it's all there in your hand, you just combine buttons for it. You can even aim up to get headshots, which looks like it would be really awkward, and can be when the game pushes a level's verticality, but works well enough because of this aiming reticle, while being just a little awkward so you don't spam it. The dual wielding equipping works really well too. I'm just bringing up all the stupid shit I want to talk about at once so we can get out of the way. This whole, holding different weapons in different hands and being able to holster them or whatever is something I found kind of awkward in other games. I'm thinking of a game called Maximum Action, where you press 1 or 2 to holster different weapons, and then when you unholster them into a hand that already has a weapon, it pushes another one into that holster, but there's nothing showing what weapon's in what holster, and you might want to use a scope so you throw a weapon away, but there's different buttons for what weapon will be thrown, and this is a fast-paced action game? This game is cool, and I did get used to this, but, it's a bit much. In Project Nexus though, it's simplified so you just have 2 sets of weapons, and if you want to throw a weapon away, you hold Q while pressing its mouse button. Easy, It's all little decisions like this that just work to make it feel like you're in control and have different options. It is still a simple brawler, but there's a lot of little ways you can play more efficiently or just fuck about. Reminds me of the Arkham games a little, and how you could probably play it spamming attack and occasionally countering, but things like attack timing and enemy weaknesses push you to be better, along with subtleties in how the AI works that stops it from getting too much. At least most of the time, and things like your health regenerating faster if you fight or having a separate regenerative shield for gunfire. It's all these little things that probably wouldn't be very interesting to list, but come together to stop this from being the spammy, mindless beat-em-up it looks like. It is kind of mindless, but most games are really, they're just a good mindless where you don't feel mindless. Feels good in the actual game feel as well. Characters have weight without being too heavy. When you're up against a big crowd, it feels like you're properly having to push against it and hack through. Very Dead Rising-y, which can be said for the weapons too. There's a ton of them, and they've got an accuracy that makes them feel unique. Cutting through stuff with a big axe feels like cutting through stuff with a big axe, different to cutting through stuff with a saw or a katana or using a blunt weapon, and you're switching between these like this. The weapons never stop feeling good because you're never just there with the assault rifle until the player perspective is burned into your screen. Guns all have a different range too, which sounds obvious, but they have a different sweet spot depending on that, where you do more damage if an enemy's in that range. So you actually, directly use these weapons differently. There's gun customization, and I actively didn't want to increase the range too much because it would mean the sweet spot was miles away. Makes you think about each weapon as a different thing. So you've got all this stuff going on, and it means the game might not capture madness at a glance, but the spirit of over-the-top arcadey violence done by simple characters is still there in its brutality and improvisational nature. I just love juggling in-game combat or throwing something away because I'm bored of it and I want to do something different, and this works pretty well for that. The first way you'll probably experience it is in the story campaign, which is basically what you think it is. Play through a big madness video as the main characters in the form of several linear stages. There's a hub between every level, and I'm not sure why, because there's nothing in it, and you can just go up to a board and select the level you want to play. There's enemies to fight, but who cares? I think this was meant to be more and then was scrapped or something like that, but honestly, as it is, it just makes things confusing. Particularly with the DLC, which I swear must have been included just to give the open world some purpose. It's impossible to find because, it's just in the open world, which you're given no other reason to explore. And once you find it as well, it's just go read, and you close the game instead. Anyway, yeah, so it's basically just punching guys in linear stages. There's a lot of different guys to punch, to be fair, and the levels jump location a lot. Combined with the array of weapons, I never felt like it fell into just doing the same thing over and over. There's enough variety. There's a couple puzzles as well, one of those ones where you try to line up a bunch of platforms to walk across, but you press this button and the platforms go up, and then down several notches, and then back up several, and then it spins or whatever. It's fucked. I understand that's the puzzle, but man, I just pressed the button till it worked. In this way, it reminds me of a Lego game weirdly, with the co-op and structure and different playable characters. Those characters are even unique with different abilities, but the game just doesn't tell you this for some reason. I thought it was a classic co-op thing of one character being significantly worse than the rest because certain characters just had more health and better weapons, but it turns out others are stronger or faster or whatever. You're just not told. I have no clue what the stage victory time is for either, it's just wrong from what I can tell. It says oh, you completed that in 5 minutes, and I look at the recording and it's been 30. Part of me respects them just lying like that, but I don't get why it happens. There's a really inconsiderate siren outside my window. Here we go. Shut the fuck up. But I am loitering, as the main unique thing for the story campaign is the story, I guess. The story in Madness cartoons is naturally pretty light, but similar to the conversion from 2D to 3D, they beefed up the narrative a bit for this. You're on a mission to
Destroy Project Nexus.
But along the way you'll uncover the mystery of what exactly
Project Nexus
is, and the huge world-threatening conspiracy behind it. It's a bit stupid. See, when I say the story in the cartoons is light, I mean no dialogue light. There are some Madness videos with dialogue.
Fighting. Ah! Fighting. Ah!
But for the actual videos, the most you get is a little sheriff? Here though, there is dialogue and it's just not very good. I think it's much easier to make something look cool than it is to make something sound cool, because here I can see the writer behind the text, and I mean that in a bad way this time. There are several characters that are just doing that, whoa, I'm the Joker, I'm mental, I'm having a fit kind of thing, and they're put next to the main good guys who are just so badass they don't even give a fuck. It just gave off a weird vibe to me. I like that it's coming from just a dorky little guy, but it just didn't fit right. The story's another thing where it's just dumb really, but I kind of like that in ways. I don't want to spoil
what Project Nexus really is.
but its main concept involves exactly what you think it does, science going too far. And they do go too far, way too far, which I kind of love. There's an extreme maximalism here where it just gets to incomprehensible territory. So violent, it's not even violent. Like, it'll go, 7 trillion have died, and you won't think, whoa, that's crazy, you'll just think, what does that mean? It does all of the cliche, video gamey, sci-fi horror stuff you'd think it would, so it ends up fully leaning into that edgy nonsense you're expecting, and maybe kind of want. I do wish it wasn't written in such a cool tone, but it doesn't go to MCU jokiness territory either. When it takes itself seriously, it does take itself seriously. It also feels too serious in that moment as well though. I don't know. I don't think the writer is actually not very good at writing, because it's just, something like this is such a tightrope of tone to get right. It's cool in such a specific, over-the-top way that feels like it shouldn't be cool, and more someone's, like, idea of cool. But also someone's idea of cool that's more endearing than the slight groaniness of this. Shockingly, I don't think it manages to balance that, but there is something here to enjoy in amongst the fighting, especially if you accept it as a video game plot. The other big section of the game is the arena, which ends up feeling more like the main section of the game. Oh, by the way, my rating for Mad Dress Up is 9 out of 10. Anyway, the arena's supposed to work as a horde mode, but you know how people talk about Black Ops Zombies way more than the campaign, at least in my experience. It lets you experiment with these mechanics without any of the railroading of the campaign, so while that doesn't ask you to learn weird techniques and if anything disincentivizes doing kind of gamey stuff, Zombies pushes the opposite. I've never really even been into Black Ops Zombies, but I have run around a Minecraft village looking for Easter eggs while zombies chase us without legs. I think the devs of Project Nexus kind of knew this because the arena here is a full campaign with tons of unlockables, customizable stuff, and a whole leveling system. The arena in the Flash game was just one room where you fought enemies until you died, leveled up your man, and then tried again, and this is kind of similar in that. It's the same combat as the campaign, but in a wave-based context where you start weak and level up your fellow to make him strong. Don't call him Mr. Madness Man, even if it's the first thing you think of, because it's not particularly funny, and will follow you through the entire thing. But yeah, you start weak as shit, and I mean like weak as shit, like almost to a funny degree. You go from the campaign where you're throwing all these punches and gunning down piles of enemies, and then you boot up the arena where your dodge starts more as a flop. You earn 4 types of XP though, unarmed, melee, ranged and acrobatic, which are earned through using those abilities. Punch enemies to earn unarmed XP, hit enemies with weapons to earn melee XP, shoot enemies for ranged XP, and dodge or throw stuff for acrobatics XP. You then use these points to claim relevant perks like using acrobatics XP to not have a shit dodge. When you claim a perk, you also get to put some points into an attribute like strength or dexterity, and the attributes you can put points into depends on what type of XP you're using. At the start you choose a character which usually has a weak and strong skill. I picked the Patient, who was good with unarmed but weak with acrobatics, meaning they had a handful of extra unarmed perks available and could put 2 points into an attribute with every unarmed upgrade, instead of just 1. I said that like the 5 or 6 stores thing. Acrobatics basically gets the opposite, with a handful less skills and no points to put into an attribute after upgrades. Characters also have a couple unique abilities, like the Patient got an imaginary friend who'd come help in combat sometimes, like the mysterious stranger in Fallout. So it's a nice little system that means you'll probably specialise in particular combat methods while encouraging you to try and use everything, since there's no real reason not to, you're just losing out on cool perks. You do genuinely notice a difference as well. You're not going to get to the end of this like a JRPG and just have that one move that's suspiciously cheap and kills everything on screen, but with how direct the combat feels to play, you will notice when you punch faster or harder or aim better or whatever. I wanted to make my man more powerful, and I'm not always a huge fan of upgradey stuff crammed into action games like this because it's a hard balance to get right. It has its place, but you're probably going to make the character way too weak at the start, way too strong at the end, or it's just not noticeable. But here, with how in control you feel in the combat, it feels like you are getting stronger rather than the number in the code was just increased. The main thing I found interesting about this though is that it completely deconstructs the combat. As I said, the default you find in the campaign is Keanu Reeves in 47 Ronin. You're crunching men with 50 moves at once, but in the arena it strips all those moves away and you realise just how much was going on there. As I said, you can play this as a button masher, but there's a lot of little techniques to use and those are highlighted in the arena when you earn them one at a time. Things like dashing between enemies and timed attacks doing more damage, or just realising how many actions you can do. It might sound kind of slow and annoying to unlock abilities like throwing with your other hand, but there's enough in that core combat and you unlock stuff fast enough that I never really minded. I also didn't play these separately, so I was going from the arena where I had my guy and then switching to the campaign where it was like, Jesus Christ, Carl Wrench called, he wants his action masterpiece back. Unlike the Flash game, you're not limited to one arena and a menu here. It starts in the Sleepwalker training, but you only have to complete so many waves before moving to a completely different arena, which you do the same thing in, completing so many waves and moving to another. After every few arenas you get this beat 'em up style stage where it's just a linear set of enemies as well. These arenas are mostly pretty unique and fun. It uses all the enemy types you see in the campaign, which means it really gets to emphasise your character growing, and they all feel different enough with traps and unique layouts and objectives like defending something for extra money. Outside of arenas you have a little hub where you can do stuff like buy weapons or armour for your guy. It's a bit awkward to walk around but does make everything feel more lively. It's supposed to be your base for your army, so you hire different hirelings to help in arenas, such as Drumpf, lol. He is needed to progress the game. I got to a point where it was just too much, a massive wall of enemies, and the hirelings do help. They're not the strongest or smartest, but they divide enemies' attention, so when there's too many enemies it goes into all-out war. I do think it leans into this a bit much. By the end, there's a ton of them, and they can do a lot of the work for you, which, on the one hand, it's a bit of a like, ooh, look at me, gang leader moment, but also just kind of boring. They have to increase the wavelength so much as well that I found some of the later arenas were just a bit long. They're a cool inclusion though, especially since they have leveling. It's not as in-depth as your own character with them not having perks to upgrades and just automatically leveling, but you can customise them, just like you can customise yourself. I've not really mentioned it much, but the base has a whole shop voiced by some dirty jock piece of shit, fucking get him out. You buy weapons to go into arenas with, which have limited ammo or durability, but having a powerful shotgun is going to make a difference, and you can customise them as well. The armour is a whole other thing, with different coats, glasses, helmets, hair, shoes, accessories, colours. I got these awful Joker colours from the character I picked, it's fantastic. There's a bunch you can do here, and I dressed up all the hirelings individually. It took a minute to get used to. There's this weird blue overlay whenever you're previewing something, which is just ugly and gets in the way. Buying and equipping stuff are two completely separate things as well. You have to go to different menus for each, and the shop doesn't tell you what you own. On top of the overall clunkiness, there's the RPG stuff. Everyone has limited encumbrance, so you can't wear what you like, and I can't do the stat stuff. It does all the, well, if you equip that, they'll be 1 point less brutal. And I think, oh no, but in reality, I don't know what that means. I ended up having fun with it though. Hirelings come with armour, which will be deleted if they unequip it, but it's usually just like a hat and a mustache or something, so I made it a rule to not unequip that stuff and based their outfits off that, which was fun. I ended up with guys that had nails in their head and weird gas masks, but groovy little sunglasses. I just kept adding shit to my guy. He ended up with like a plague mask and walrus tusks and a Viking helmet that I replaced with a big hat. This guy's mental, watch out, he's whoa. All this stuff comes together to make a fun little mode that just kind of brings out the best in this game. It's not a masterpiece or anything, but I liked it. It's probably the best Madness game, but that's not fair. It reminded me of an Xbox Live Arcade game, which is fun considering the series' origins. It's dorky and a little mindless, but solid and carries the spirit of its source material. A madness equivalent to Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game, where it's just kinda nice that it exists. That's probably a good place to end it anyway, but I'll try one more Flash game first. The hot dog jerk is here with a wee madness guy, so why not that? Well, I can't just scrap the video now, so... I tried writing something all like, "Ooh, the wonders of small art," but that feels completely disingenuous after showing 15 seconds of a game and in turn putting 2 slurs in the video. I did enjoy stuff like that though, not the slurs. Why did I write it like that? I like stuff though that's just directly, let's make this because I think it would be cool. It's simple, it makes sense to me, and leads to some really fun stuff in an outsider art kind of way. I know I keep bringing up like, oh, you can see the developer in this one, but you kinda can in a lot of these because of their more amateur nature, and I really like that. And I think it's cool that something like Madness can exist like that. They made something that they wanted to make, and it caused other people to want to make stuff. Because of it, some people in the 2000s fucked about with making games and cartoons and stuff, and that's just good, you know? Especially as it's still doing that. Along with Project Nexus, there's another video being made, so the series isn't dead by any means. Madness 12 actually got uploaded while I was editing this, so it's cool. I like the layout of the stage kind of fight arena bits. It feels like a video game, but it still feels kind of otherworldly and helly and kind of, I don't know, it's fun. I like the colouring on this room that I'm showing on screen now. They could have waited until just after I uploaded this video, that would have been cool. I don't care though, it's fine, whatever. I mentioned the upcoming sequels for stuff like Interaction and Retaliation, and I got a bunch of fan-made stuff in my YouTube recommended while making this. Channels like Bebo2lol are still just fucking about learning animation for Madness, but it now looks really good, doing their own style different to anything, even like Madness Regent. Promperia Boonrat added giant honking breasts, but also does subtle and natural animations while pushing the way these arenas can be viewed. There's lots of series that have created lots of fan content, but I just like how Madness fits in. It approaches this accessible form of animation and makes something with enough identity that edgy teens could latch onto it, but also bounce off it however they want. It also created a goal for Flash game programmers as they try to replicate it. I only briefly mentioned Madness Day, but that's where a lot of stuff came from, and it really highlighted a lot of creation from a variety of people. It's all open and cool. Madness is big and violent, and it's a good thing that it exists. But I'll leave you with this. What would you do if you were with your significant other, but they started clawing at your forehead, and they climbed inside your head, and suddenly you could hear their every thought, and they could hear yours? What would you do?
I don't think I'll ever live to see a prophet. I don't want to be a locket clinging to a chest till the last breath.